Once again, good morning, everyone. As for this plenary session, I will have the pleasure of sharing the role of session moderator with my colleague Aurora Carapinha, presenting our first keynote speaker of the day, Paola Viganò. She's an architect and urbanist, full professor in urban theory and urban design at the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, where she directs the Habitat Research Center and the Lab U, as well as at the UAV Venice University. She received the Grand Prix de l'Urbanisme in 2013, the title of Doctor Honoris Causa by the UC Louvain in 2016 in the frame of Utopia for Our Time, the Flemish Culture Award for Architecture in 2017, the Golden Medal to the career of Milano Triennale in 2018, and more recently, in 2022, she received the Schelling Prize for Architectural Theory. Together with Bernardo Secchi, she founded Studio from 1919 to 2014, working on numerous projects and visions in Europe. Since 2015, Studio Paola Viganò works on the ecological and social transition of cities, landscapes, and territories, designing urban and territorial projects and realizing public spaces in Europe. Among recent publications, we can highlight Life as a Common Space for New Biopolitical Project from 2022, the Horizontal Metropolis 2019, and Territories of Urbanism, the project as Knowledge Producer 2016. Paola, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you.
So, thank you very much for this invitation. I'm very happy to be here, and thanks also for the introductions. They were very, very dense, especially Marta. I think we needed more time, but I think I share many of the things you were saying. So I think I have a little bit of time to present a few projects, I say projects in a quite wide sense, research and say studio projects, in which I more and more understand the, let's say, the centrality and the complexity of this notion of landscape. I'm not a landscape architect, I'm an architect and an urbanist, dealing with the landscape since many years, also realizing landscapes. But let's say that the complexity of this category that we use so much is impressive, and I think you need your whole life not to go through this complexity, and also the adaptations to the different context and the different also moment of our societal life. So the title, you see, the territory subject will be a little bit at the center, and I will use three contexts to tell you three landscape stories. First of all, as it is evident to everyone, I think we have to really understand where we are today, so history now. This is a collage of an important American artist about the situation of today. We must get into our heads that our lives have changed, which means that when we speak of ecological transition, we tend to forget the social dimension of the ecological transition. So I think we always have to put the two terms together, socio-ecological transition. And I'm interested to the two, from my perspective, the two main implications of this socio-ecological transition. The first implication is an epistemological one, which means understanding the basis, the epistemological basis of the transition. From my perspective, I'm a designer, is in fact the role of the project of designing in producing a specific and original type of knowledge that is, let's say, each time adapted to the existing conditions. And you know that design is a powerful device to deconstruct, to recombinate, to conceptualize, to project, to investigate the future, etc. So, in fact, the book that was quoted before, The Territories of Urbanism, tried to frame this quite vast fields of epistemological production through design. And I'm absolutely convinced of the necessity today to put design, the project, the looking also beyond tomorrow, the long-term futures, to investigate also the long-term futures through design. This is more and more frequent today. It was much less frequent 20 years ago. The second implication on which I'm working at the moment is the ontological basis of the transition. There is something that is a shift in the ideas, in the values, in the priorities we have. There is something about the nature of things now that is changing. And I would like to start touching this important dimension through the idea of a shift in the way we are looking to the territory or at the territory. We are used to speak of the territory as a resource to exploit normally, or as a support to our activities, or as an object on which we project our intentions, our desires, even in the landscape, let's say, object. There is so much of our projections that are on it, or offering services with no individuality. So from this idea, I think we have to shift to a different one, that is the idea of a territory subject. Subject means that it has individuality, it has names, it has rights. It has the right, for example, to be around the table where decisions about the territory are taken. It needs visibility, presence, and possibility to express also. Of course, this means to explore value systems that do not coincide with the current ones. And this is why I think we have to reinvestigate the relations between design, space, life, and, of course, forms of power. Now, the first story is about the Great Geneva, where Great Geneva is a configuration, it's a metropolitan area between France and Switzerland, where Geneva plays the main role, is the most attractive space, of course. And we propose to enter into this territory through two main lenses, the one of soil and the one of labor, work. Because I think that in this moment of socio-ecological transition, we are rediscussing the terms of a biopolitical project. Let's say the modern biopolitical project, we will come back maybe at the end on this point, but I think it's quite clear to all of you. We are going to something different. And I'm quite convinced that through the understanding of the evolution of soils, urban and less urban soils, and the evolution of work, of labor, we can really touch to the main also paradoxes of the actual moment. In this territory, we have the most part of the jobs that are on the Swiss side. You see, we are close to the 80%, while the main part of the housing stock is on the French side. It's very simple, easy to understand that on one side there is the attractivity, the production of wealth, and on the other side is the dormitory, the sleeping areas for the people that are commuting and going on the other side of the frontier. In fact, there is a lot of problems related to this movement of people every day. It is also interesting to understand that it's a very tertiary economy. So during the pandemic in Switzerland, about the 50% of the population was working from home. just to give you an idea, in Italy it was not much more than the 30%, because there is much higher level of manufacturing, for example. I mean, things that you cannot do at home. You have really to go to work. But of course, the 50% of the population working from home means another landscape, in the sense that the flows are different. The use of the space is different. You can revive, for example, places that were just sleeping areas. So there are some potentials related to this point. One other important question is that it's not the first time we are rediscussing soil and labor. In the case of Geneva, the crisis of the 70s, it was a crisis of the big industry that was exploding and closing, and the return to the soil, to agriculture, to nature, let's say, and the rediscussion of how do we work for whom, so you have a teacher becoming just helping elderly people to learn how to sing, or the industrial work being transformed, and so on. These stills are coming from a fundamental movie that you probably, some of the elderly people here probably know, Jonas, that will be 25 in the year 2000. Donc in French is Jonas qui aura 25 ans à l'an 2000. Is a movie from Alain Tanner, very important Swiss director. And I really suggest, if you don't know this movie, please give a look. You will find in this movie all the tensions, all the contradictions and the paradoxes we are facing today. And I am absolutely convinced that today we are simply discussing things that were already discussed 50 years ago. And then we hide. We decided to cancel them, to put them aside. But they're all there. So here you have the idea of coming back to the soil, to the ground. There was the idea of a new type of education. It was a bit a utopic movie, of course. But nevertheless, it was really underlining the crisis of the system, as documents like Limits to Growth were underlining at the same period, more or less. It was some years before. So we are just back to those questions. And of course, landscapes are quite crucial inside this revision. This is a more contemporary map that is about the inhabitability of the metropolitan area of tomorrow. On this side, you see, no, you can see my, you don't see the arrow, no. But say in Geneva is on your left, and well, the end of the lake, of the Leman. And you see the temperatures will be very, very elevated in the future. But what is very interesting to see is that not only in the urban areas you will have a very high temperatures, but also in an alpine valley. This is the Arve Valley, arriving to the Mont Blanc, to the White Mountain. And you see that the same high temperatures will be also registered there, because the morphology of the valley is so narrow that there is not so much ventilation. And it is also today one of the most polluted areas in the Great Geneva, and in the future will be one of the hottest spots in Great Geneva. So when sometimes we think that the problem is just in the cities of adaptation, is not true. We will have, on the Alps, you understand very well that because of the position, the orientation, the morphologies, you will have enormous problems related to the hot temperatures. And then a lot of other, let's say, risks that I'm not going to explain in this moment. The scenarios we have proposed about soil and labor are really dealing with the different transformations. Just give a look to the way in which we try to represent spatial thinking, where the landscapes, also the interpretation of the landscapes, so these are coming from Adler landscape representation of the Leman Lake, are always fundamental, not to understand where we are and why we are saying certain things. For example, on all the working spaces of today, for example, all the industrial platforms that will be reinterpreted in the future, different types of economy will be developed in the future, and also the transformation, let's say, of their inhabitability as a fundamental aspect. But in terms of soils, we put a lot of emphasis on those soils that are neither urban or, let's say, rural. And we understood something that even the pedologists were underestimating, that we have, let's say, more or less the same percentage of rural agricultural cultivated soils, natural soils, 20%, and the urban soils. Urban soils here is not the built soils, are the open spaces inside, let's say, urban, so-called urban areas. And we see that the percentage are very similar. So that the urban soil can play a very important role in the adaptation to climate change, and today is widely underestimated, even from the specialists that are the pedologists. Which means that there is a large, very vast space for new projects, for design, because we have to understand why there is this degradation of soils. I think you are all probably expert of this, so I'm not getting into the detail, but all our soils are more and more poor and with less organic matters, etc. How we are losing, of course, biodiversity, but also which are the consequences of this degradation of the soils. So about problems of quality of water, food insecurity, rapid climate change, even more poverty, social poverty, migration, and reduction of the ecosystem services. So we have to imagine evolutions in the future, starting exactly from what we have today. There is no need not to go to imagine immense transformations coming from somewhere. We just have to work on what is there, in the idea that everything can be ameliorated. And this is also the way in which we were dealing with the problem of food security. Switzerland has a long tradition of investing in agricultural areas, but the truth today is that Switzerland, together with Luxembourg, they are the most dependent countries in the world in terms of food production. They need the rest of the world to be fed. So there is a lot to be recovered, to be repaired, as in these terms, and a lot to be transformed. We put this kind of more general, let's say, understanding at the prism of a series of kind of statements, let's say. But the first is, as I said already before, the idea of the territory subject. In order to represent, because we need also representation, new representation of the territory subject, we decided to really try to give a name and to understand exactly the individuality of each part of this territory. It's not just the landscapes. It is, of course, learning from some landscape atlases that were already present, but is not coinciding with them. And what is, for me, very beautiful, so we realized with the students all the different pieces, and by realizing them, we needed to understand. And you see, for example, the watershed related to the small water courses, because there are very small and short water courses, but you can really individuate them. You understand much better the rhythm they give, not to the morphology of the territory. And each mountain, each hill, each small exception is coming out and explaining why, when you look around, you have the impression that there is a continuity of line, which is not. There are different small relief, hills, etc. And you understand better how they compose at the end a certain landscape that is perceived as a kind of interior, although it is not completely bounded. And so first statement, the territory subject. Second, finally and definitively understand that the metropolitan area of Geneva is made not only of a few cities, but hundreds of villages, and work for them. Because all the planning tradition we have today and in the last decades is only looking at cities. The biggest first, the secondary cities, and then try to connect them with some strong infrastructural line of public transport. That's an old theory, let's say. The problem is that the 50% of the population is not living in those situations. The other 50, yes, is living in cities, peripheries, etc., but the other 50 is not. Is living in those small dots that you see here that are everywhere, because there is a long tradition of dispersed settlement. And on top of those old villages, new, let's say, single-family houses, neighborhoods have been constructed in the last 30, 40 years. And they are not served by public transport, not really served by public facilities, equipments. So there are problems, very big problems, also that are, let's say, enhanced by the presence of a frontier, because France and Switzerland are not the same country. They are not inside Europe. I mean, one of them is inside Europe, the other one no. So you really have a frontier there. Although this frontier you need to maintain open, because otherwise all the services in Geneva, they would not work. During the pandemic, the paradox was that the frontier was never closed. And the same also in Lugano in the south. Because otherwise all the hospital would have had to close, because all the taking care people are coming from the outside. So you can reverse the idea of a dependency. Is more dependent Geneva on the rest, or is really the rest depending on Geneva? And you start to reverse a little bit now the power relations between the two sides, because in fact everybody is depending on the other side. So the third statement is about what is there. What is there is carbon footprint and embodied energy. And working with a colleague at the DPFL, Corentin Fivet, that is really studying materials, we could frame this map in which it's clear that is the periphery, the most important part, in terms of energy embedded in the territory, is the peripheral part, is where you have all the concrete structures that will be the ones that you can reuse for centuries. And we have to do with that, because maybe in the future we will not have any concrete anymore. Another colleague, engineer, is really fighting for the no sand scenario. So we will not have sand in the future, so no concrete. So the concrete we have, we really have to restore, to maintain as much as possible. So that is really the big reservoir we have of concrete, which means of reuse. And through this, a series of themes that we have been touching. Another very fundamental point is related to mobility. You were speaking of mobility. So you see in the picture on the left, 1925, that was the network of railways and tramways in the Great Geneva. Look at 2020. Looks like a desert. And then, of course, our vision was to propose, reinstall in some case, reuse in some other case, to reopen some abandoned land. We can very easily frame the fact that there has been a period in which political and economic choices were made in favor of the car. And today we have to reconsider the possibility of a no-car scenarios. A very important point in our reflection was the understanding of the role of what we can consider in the frame of the territory subject, the weak part of the territory, the weak subjects that inhabit the territory. And we think that apart from the big infrastructure, the hard infrastructure, mainly related to transportation, we have to rethink not only the ecological infrastructure. There is today a lot of emphasis on green blue, etc., gray, brown type of networks, which is very good, but also the social infrastructure and connect the two. So for us, this is the weak structure. Maybe you can understand from those words that are coming from the postmodern reflection of the 80s, mainly the philosophical reflection on the need to go beyond this idea of hard and strong modernity in function of re-understanding the role of the weak subjects, of the weak structures. And we started to say, okay, what if we imagine that in the future, in this very dispersed type of urban territory, it will be mainly to this weak structure, the possibility to connect and to give a common space, a kind of federative project to this very varied and contrasted metropolitan area with rich, poor, very, really connecting everyone. And we start with saying, okay, we have a forest, we have wetland, but wetland are very, very weak, as you know, flooding areas. We have a little bit of urban also, and agriculture. And altogether we arrive to almost 40% of the Great Geneva Basin. Is it a lot? Is it enough for the transition? For us, it is the test bed for the transition, for all the strategies related to the transition. And then we have started to understand what these spaces that are normally submitted to our logics. So we arrive with a train, we arrive with a tramway, we just cross them, we just disconnect them, we violate them, we negate them, we cover rivers. Now we have made so many incredible things to these weak subjects. And if you start with the idea that each one of them is a subject, you have to revise completely, no? your type of project. So it's a complex ecosystem where we investigate, of course, the depth also of soil and underground. We work together also with the generation of what is there, the activities, the buildings, the public spaces. These are not two, it's a comparison, the pictures made of the Great Geneva that inspired a very important urbanist to imagine a mesh of public spaces that were the same for the urban area and for the rural area. Imagine the same quality, the same type of spaces crossing both the consolidated city and the outside, the agricultural land. A same spatial device of public accessible spaces connecting different things, forests, villages, activities. And we took something of this spirit that was nevertheless mainly dedicated to the protection of the landscapes, to protect the cultural heritage of the villages. The villages are not just buildings, it's also big trees, for example, the small square of the village, the activities that were the work of people working with animals or working with other type of activities. Of course, 1 century ago, because it was realized in the 30s, this plan that I will show you later in a diagram, the main scope was really the protection of this cultural landscape. I think today, of course, we need to protect, but this is not enough. For us, and they say this is what we see in the second image, is more the idea of regenerating, reactivating all what we have realized in the last 50 years at least, and of course protecting heritage, but also to adapt, to transform, to make this something that can go through this transition. And the weak structure becomes the main infrastructure to go through this varied, contrasted, heterogeneous type of landscape and try to connect and to have a very strong relational type of project. which means also to work in all dimensions, to understand that we work at the same time on the water cycle, we work on biodiversity, we work on different type of agriculture. We are speaking with the pedologists of conservation agriculture, that is not only agroforestry, but really a conservation agriculture that can regenerate the soil. And at the same time, we look for social entities. We look for associations, we look for marginal people. We discover between a forest and a Rhone river and an industrial platform, you understand that the refugees are there. You understand there are small communities, utopian communities that are the remaining of the 70s described by the movie I showed you before. You discover so many marginalities, fragilities that are along those spaces of connections. You try to map them. And you see the upper image is the mesh imagined by Braillard, this architect and urbanist, and Bodmer, that was the chief of the urbanist service in Geneva in the 30s. This incredible plan was never used, of course. It was made during a very radical socialist government in the 30s. When the socialist government was crushed, nothing remained of this plan. But this plan is always coming back with the logics it was proposing. That was an understanding of the territory, how the territory works, how the water works, how the slope works, and a series of spaces, urban spaces, that were considered important to be protected inside this mesh of public spaces. They were calling them public surfaces. So the idea of a space that is for everyone, both in the rural side and in the urban side. And we rethink this because there is a strong territorial logic in this diagram, but we accompany this with this idea of not being just a protection plan, but on the contrary, to open to the experimentation of the space of this transition. So water is fundamental component, climatic regulation, active mobility and accessibility, One Health, so the idea of sharing the same type of well-being, agriculture as a continuity tool, diffusion and strengthening of biodiversity, inclusion of fragilities, social infrastructures, and social economy. Because we have to think at the same time that we are nevertheless pushing the system, the big economic system, to go in a different direction. We need to articulate this system. No? Let's say this space can be also the starting of something concerning different types of economy. Reinforce the coexistence of heterogeneous social ecosystem. So for us, and we have presented this way, and we are dealing with this space, we had the chance also to continue to work a little bit on this space as really a prototype of the transition, whose strength, also in terms of iconic representation, is not to be underestimated, because I think we need also to imagine new icons for the future. And this is a kind of landscape icon that could transform the actual relations among the different parts of the territory in Great Geneva. And at the same time, accompanying this kind of regular decreasing of CO2 emissions, because we have to go in that direction, knowing that we will never get to zero, but that the soil, the regenerated soil, will have the capacity to absorb a quite interesting part of those emissions that we will never be able to diminish. We will never be able to get to zero, never. So we need really to absorb, and to absorb we need soils that are in good health, with a good tenant of organic matter, so soils that are belonging to a different type of agriculture. And we are now continuing on one part of the Great Geneva, a part where we have a French and a Swiss side, the Chablais say on the eastern side of the lemon, where we really had the need to bring to show that, in fact, what we need today is at the same time to listen to people and listen to the landscapes. We need really to merge these two kind of attentions. And together with the description of the different landscapes of this region, why we need to do this. Because unfortunately, and I'm saying this as an urbanist also, urbanism is forgetting about that. And all planification is very poor about that. So I'm making an effort to really reintroduce this capacity to read and to listen to the territory, from where I take this idea of the territory subject, which means also to come back to this kind of topographical, morphological landscape reading, which is not a way to hide other problems, because sometimes landscape is also used to hide other questions. So I don't want to hide anything, but I need, nevertheless, to construct representations where everybody is invited to enter those landscapes, not to forget, not to have a kind of flat representation of the territory. At the same time, looking for all weak signals of the transition already existing in the territory and brought by society, or say civic society. Of course, nobody's asking us to do this, neither the landscape, let's say, understanding, nor the societal understanding. This is something we do because we think it's necessary to do, to listen and to understand. We decided to make also meetings with these people. Not only we put them on a map, but we decided to meet them. And it was very interesting. Of course, you understand also how weak they are. They are extremely weak. Although they seem quite numerous, in fact, you understand that it's still a very weak network, and that we are still very far from this possibility to go into a transition. So more and more, I'm reflecting on the category of the weak. Uncertainty is also related to this point. If you are weak, you have to be ready to uncertainty, because you cannot manage a lot. Now, maybe a reference that could be a little bit strange, Rem Koolhaas, of course not a weak architect, he was writing already in the 80s, to consider the open space as backbone of the urban system means to take urbanism's position of weakness as its premises. I think it's quite, I share. We first are weak. Normally, in the public arena, no, we are not for sure those that can really impress a direction, unfortunately, maybe. Or maybe is a chance, I don't know, but in any case, we are not. So we are weak together with weak subjects, with weak agents. So it's a kind of alliance among weak subjects. And I think that this weak structure can respond to the three fundamental ambitions. First, in any case, it opens to the radical alteration of the design perspective, because you are reversing the priorities. So it's already an interesting point. It articulates the value of heterogeneity, coexistence, and marginality, where the marginality is not just a problem, but is a possibility, is a potential. And it can help, this reflection on the weak, to shape a new substantial action, which is not denying the biopolitical nature of the transition, of which I'm convinced. There is a biopolitical nature of the transition. In any case, whether we are there, present, acting, bringing hypotheses or not, it's part of the idea of this transition that is touching at the same time our behavior, our lifestyles, our environment, etc., etc. So there is a biopolitical dimension there. My point is, how can we find affirmative type of biopolitics, not a negative, not a thanatology, something that is going towards life and not against life, as the modern project in many sense went. Okay, second story that I think that I have to be very more fast, about uncertainty and marginality, and the role of horizontality among territories. So I would like to speak in a short way of marginal and weak, the lessons we can learn from both. Working in a marginal region, the entanglement of socioeconomic urban questions and the ecological one. Again, you cannot disconnect them. Far from the pressure of attractivity, Europe is full of non-attractive areas. The reconsideration of the potential. I'm not talking of Portugal, which is very attractive from a certain point of view, yes. I'm talking of much less attractive territories, like, for example, the Walloon territory in Belgium. The Walloon region, as you know, went through this incredible history related to the coal presence. So there you see all the cities. It goes also towards France, but also part of, say, Wallonia, but also Flanders with the Limburg, of course, Germany. And today, since at the end of the 50s, beginning of the 60s, the crisis was already becoming very important, and there is the need to rethink all this space, this black furrow of coal. And I very simply propose now this idea of looking at this as an enormous region, not European park, where you have cities, where you have activities, different economies, society, etc. But there is a lot of landscape that is very important, credible, high quality that is there. And working with this kind of background of hypothesis, I'm working in the last years in many different contexts. For example, here we are in this very frequent situation of being in between cities, bigger cities, and you have villages, you have a lot of big industrial areas that are almost all abandoned or really not so much used. And you still have, for example, in the planification, violet zone, which means possible industrial area, where you have an old meander of the river, so it is still possible to go there and to build a new industrial, unuseful industrial area, when you have more than 1,000 hectares in the region that are abandoned industrial areas and polluted industrial areas. So we have to live with this kind of contradictions and paradoxes, but I think we have also to start solve some of those contradictions. For example, change the old plans. And the point is that you have to really convince that everybody that this is not a fallow land. This is not a frisch. This is something that contains a lot of infrastructures, a lot of possibilities. And you have to work with this type of urbanity that has nothing to do with the normal, traditional, urban type of space. You have to convince that this is not waste. It's not because it's polluted that then is a waste. No, you can do things in order to reuse them, although it's very expensive. You need investment also, but you also can work with the unpermanent landscapes that can be used, and we also work with the University of Liège on the possibility to use certain type of production, of agricultural production, related to the pharmaceutic industry, that are not depolluting the ground, but they can produce a certain wealth, money, that can be used eventually then to really start the depollution of the grounds. The recycle industry is also potential in these areas, and already from the Flemish side, there is the idea of reusing some of those platforms in relation to the recycling of materials. But also, it's very important to clarify that this is not available land. It's not just land that is there and you can do whatever you like because it's there, because it's abandoned, because nobody is demonstrating interest for that land. Because that land can really plays so many functions, can reconnect certain areas, can give the possibility to reopen certain water courses. You can give you can reuse some of the existing buildings. So there are so many things already there. So you cannot just look at them as available land. Also, the beautiful landscapes are there. There is still a lot of pressure for going to live in this part of the country because it's less expensive than Brussels, for example, and you are quite well connected to Brussels, just because there is a certain availability of land. But this is not available land. This is land that has already a lot of functions. And you see here in old maps of the 18th century, the structure of villages, forests, etc., which is, of course, still there, still present, is very permanent. And you see here how it merged with the rest of the industrial cycle. For example, the terrils, so the small hills that are just the waste of the coal. Today they have become a small forest. They are very important kind of identitarian spaces today. They are considered from the inhabitants absolutely crucial to maintain the memory, for example, of this industrial past. And for this, we made images that really try to synthesize which are the elements of this territory that we consider a city and a park. And here we are in La Louvière, that is one of the poorest cities in Wallonia. And you understand that you have, starting from the lower part, you have the rivers that need to be renaturalized. Of course, spaces along the river that can be also used by people. You have the working class houses, very interesting, that are becoming a fundamental heritage of those areas. Unitary settlements, for which there is a question of adaptation in the future. You still have an incredible agriculture, very rich agriculture, because the soils are very, very fertile. And you have the terril as kind of emergencies in this slightly hilly space. And you have the canals that are in part protected by UNESCO. You have lifts bringing the boats at different levels. So you have canals that are going against the slope, incredible work of hydraulic. Which are fundamental also landscape. So with all this, you can say that this is an enormous park at the scale of Europe, at least. And inside this park, you have people that are living, and they are living in this kind of scattered situation where this image, you see there is a kind of central park inside, that is this blue area, around which we have the Middle Age villages, more recent, the city that was founded only 1 century, a little bit more than 1 century ago, 1 century and a half, that was really related to the industrialization. So it's still a new city, a modern city. And then you reflect on how to bring services, equipment, to such a scattered situation, where if you invest in the city, you are renouncing to invest in the villages. The villages become really poor. They don't have social spaces. They have no shops. So you need to bring there something and to balance the relation between the central city and the rest. And by doing this, you can give a new quality to them. And also working on a multiplicity of economies in a region where the mono economy has been leading the economy until a few decades ago. And the point is how to invest, for example, on new economies related to health. There are hospitals, there are sports. So you have to construct new chains of values also inside this territory. I think that I don't have enough space to enter this very important scheme that we have just concluded in the Vestre Valley, that is a valley that has been flooded, one of the worst cases in 2021, during the summer of 2021. We worked with the University of Liège on a reconstruction, or let's say a vision for the reconstruction of this valley. This is the human chain that was realized last year to commemorate the flood. Okay, I have no time, I'm sorry, so I will skip, because nevertheless I want, if you want later, maybe we can come back. Yeah, but I have another case. Eventually we will come back. If we have time, we will come back. But I want to arrive to the last. Maybe just to conclude, with this work on the Wallonia region, so working through catastrophe, old catastrophe and new catastrophes, on the idea of a new vision, a new image, where the different landscapes can really play a fundamental role. We are also working on this idea of rebalancing relations. And the horizontal metropolis is a concept that is not only related to the taking care of dispersed situations that characterize our urbanity, but it's also a vision for this urbanity in order to find a more balanced relation among the different territories, because I think, and I'm not alone, I know, that we are going towards more and more divaricated territories. And we need to reconquer a level of solidarity. And the case of the Wester was showing how you cannot speak of resiliency without address the problem of solidarity, of territorial solidarity. When you work on the water, this is very clear. There is a downstream and an upstream, and you need an upstream solidarity towards the downstream. Okay, eventually we can discuss this point later. But I wanted to show you something that is on the run, not yet finished, which is for me a quite incredible, exceptional type of reflection. We are realizing a very strange type of atlas, the atlas of Paris landscapes. Paris, not Greater Paris. Paris. No, because this makes a difference. You probably know all about the convention, the European Convention on Landscape, signed in Florence in 2000. One of the fundamental sentences is that the landscape is a part of the territory as perceived by the inhabitants of the place or the visitors that change during the time under the effect of natural forces and the action of human beings. Okay, this is the definition of the convention. Then we have an atlas. We are working with Jean-Marc Bess, that is probably one of the best connoisseur of atlases. And he clarifies that an atlas is not just a book, it's just an intellectual method that consists in making an exploration. So you have to imagine it as a superposition of images, text, mapping of any sort in a space that is the space of the representation of the world. Okay, so already you are working on these two fundamental definitions. And then, as you know, the European Convention insists a lot on the inhabitant perception. So the role of imaginaries is crucial. So you investigate contemporary perception with people, but also, say, a longer-term perception that also raised a certain perception to the level of collective imagery. And of course, we organize an incredible promenade in Paris trying to bring these different imageries to the front. Also working with mapping, of course. So there is the representation of those perceptions and the representation of the territory itself. This is, for example, a series of maps realized as collage from one of my PhD students. Because we suffer of the actual GIS mapping, no? I think everybody is suffering a lot of the flattening that is coming out of those maps. And we are not able anymore, not even to have projects, visions because we are completely flattened into the information we have. What about the information we don't have? The informations that are not into the GIS? A lot. And then we are not able to imagine anymore. So I'm really becoming very nervous with this kind of things. And this was an occasion, thanks also to the fact that this is not a plan, and this has been underlined also in the public meetings. This is not a plan, this is an atlas. So let's take the freedom of not having a plan to do for once. And working on this idea of representing, express our perception through also some mappings or some representations, using the old maps where topography was very much readable. Why? Because it was more important. Today we consider, no, it's less important, so can be also a little bit not so evident, doesn't matter. It's not fundamental. But for the transition, for the ecological transition, we need to reintroduce this type of representations. There is a friend here, Martin, and we did together the work on the Eurometropolis between Lille, Courtrai, and Tournai. And we were showing how in the mapping of the 18th century, both on the French side and on the Flemish side, the topography was coming out. And you know, this is the flat country, le plat pays. And you have the impression that you have incredible valleys, etc. But it was the way in which those small topographies were represented, because it was important to understand where the water was going. And today we think, no? So we come back to some of those representations. And here, for example, we were clarifying the fact that Paris is not a circle. Now, Paris is open, is made of territorial landscapes that are entering inside the city center, big plateau that then continue out of the city. So that the idea of a closed type of city is completely against the geography. The geography is an open geography. It's true, there is a basin, but this is the Parisian basin, is much, much wider. That is a kind of a horizon at a certain level of hills that is, but it's something different. So the city of Paris is open towards the territory, artificially closed by the humans, but not by geography, for sure. And also this opening of the city is evident in the metabolism of Paris, that can be solved only thanks to the rest of the territory. Let's say that to make Paris work, you need half of France. So for those that are imagining that the compact city is more efficient in terms of energy, etc., please understand the metabolism, and then you will see that you need big territories in order to make a big city like Paris to work and to find the space for the waste, to find the energy, to find the water, to find whatever. The living, of course, Paris with the understanding of the different parts, and of course the climate change. Paris is making a very, very aggressive policy in favor of adaptation and mitigation, I have to say, because also on the traffic. And this is maybe creating now new paradoxes that I will address maybe later. I show you a little bit rapidly the first, these are not definitive materials because it's still ongoing, and we hope to have an exhibition at the Pavillon de l'Arsenal next year in May of this work. So we try to recognize the landscape structures of Paris. Here you see a first understanding of them, and what is inside this map is explained here. For example, for us, and that's an important part, the Seine. We want to show the Seine as a subject. So the Seine with the minor bed, so where the Seine is today, canalized, but also the large, the flood plain. The flood plain is the pale blue. So you understand that the big part of Paris is inside the floodable area. There is not a big memory of flooding, but the flood is absolutely possible. And we thought that it was important in this atlas to show that one of the fundamental landscape structure of the city, that is, of course, the Seine River, is not just what you see, the water that you see, but is a much larger space, that the Seine space. And you always have to remember that you are inside the Seine River, even when you are a little bit more far away. And then you understand, because that was also an ancient meander, and you understand that all the ridge of hills that you have around is exactly where the Seine was passing, and then is a much wider understanding where you are. You are really living and moving inside the space of the river. And that's very important. Then also the space of the river has been a space designed in function of the representation of a capital city. The almost 40 bridges. I think there is no other city that's 40 bridges in such a small space. Each bridge is relating to a system of monuments. And then we have the facade along the Seine that we also... So the Seine is all that. The Seine as a landscape structure is the river, the floodplain, the facade, the bridges, the monumental system related to the river. That's the landscape structure, infrastructure. Or, for example, the railways with the slopes that might become in the future kind of new rivers where people can find some green, some shadow in a city that is now looking for the 50-degree temperatures. There are studies of Paris at 50 degrees. And then we worked at a different line of horizon, and I want to show you this reading, starting from a small book, Jean Cocteau, so in the 40s of the last century. He was speaking of Paris as being made of small cities, each one working independently, autonomously, and not always with good relation, the one with the others. From this hint, it was really a hint for me when I opened this, it's really in the first lines of the book, and is mentioning as one of the small cities or village, the Grand Palais, the Palais Royal. The Palais Royal, probably you know, the Palais Royal was realized by, in the 16th, 17th century by Richelieu, and then it became a place that was inhabited. There were thousands of people living inside this architecture. At the other floors, at the ground floor, it was the center of prostitution, games, drinking. So all the armies arriving in Paris were just happy to be in Paris to go in the evening to the Palais Royal. So it was working as really the attractive part of the city, but also working as a village with people living inside. And Cocteau was also one of the inhabitants, still in the 1940. And then you read the literature, and he describes all the thresholds that you have to pass through in order to enter. It's not just the building itself, but it's the difference in levels. When you are arriving, you have stairs, you have to go down, then you have a porch, then you have to go into, you have a garden. So it's a sequence of things that give you an idea of entering and going out. And starting from this, we made a reflection starting from historical maps, from the contemporary literature, we choose starting from the 20th century. We decided that Zola, Balzac, it was really too much. So we said, let's, now also because I have to say, there is really an immense distance if you start from them. Better to start from the 20th century and the beginning of our century. Also two fundamental authors of today that are Éric Hazan, with the invention of Paris, and Jean-Christophe Bailly, Paris quand même. They really reflect on the change in a city that you imagine as being kind of a simulacrum. In fact, there are so many changes in the landscape that are happening, and you have to decide if you accept them or if you like even the fact that the city is dynamic, that its landscapes are not paralyzed, can still evolve. No? And then, of course, the inhabitants. So doing in atelier, doing moments, promenade, etc. Walking a lot with the inhabitants, that's very, very important. You confront your reading of certain landscape. You know this image for sure, no? The situationist map, the Guide psychogéographique of Paris by Guy Debord. Just to remember, the subtitle is a discourse about passion of love. It's interesting, no? The subtitle is more interesting than the main title. And you see how he, together with Yasger Jorn, I mean, with an artist, how he imagined his own space, his own landscape of Paris, no? And moving between one piece and another. And in a way between them, there is something that is what? The arrows. What are they? So with all this reflection, we said, okay, this metropolis should be interpreted as a metropolis in which, also in this case, villages play a role. All big metropolises are made of villages. Rasmussen was speaking of London, no? The unique city in the 1930s as being made of villages. For him, this was the unique city because it was made of villages. But it's not true because all big metropolises are made of villages. And we made this list of places that were mentioned by the literature or being historically villages that were integrated in the city, or being recognized by people, by inhabitants, as villages. What is the hypothesis? The hypothesis is that inside Paris there is still a dimension that is not only metropolitan. It's a very simple hypothesis. Is something speaking of a space that you feel as more your space. It's not necessarily the space where you live every day, but it's kind of affection. No, it's something you feel at home, let's say, no? And it's not just a question of spatiality, but it's really all the relations that you can have in that space. This notion as a counter notion, that is the space in between. The space in between, for example, Eric Hazan is speaking of zone franche, free zone. It's a strong term. So you say there are places that you can name that, and then there is this free zone area. Now we try to understand what is this free zone area, and it is the area where you find a lot of equipments. This is a capital city, so you have a lot of military areas, you have a lot of governmental spaces, you have things that are not clearly addressing the scale of the everyday space. And they make also big interruption inside the city, no? That are like a break. So you understand better, I think, the Guy Debord map. I think that I have understood now why it is made like that, this map. And I can understand the idea of this zone franche. Of course, in the relation with the citizens, the idea that, I'm living in a free zone, nobody likes the idea of being someone living in the free zone. So we had to check to find the new names. So now we do say simply villages and in between villages. And this idea of villages is extremely controversial. And we had enormous amount of debates about that. Although each time you get to kind of 50-50, no? 50-50 in favor, 50-50 that don't like the idea that Paris is made of villages. It's highly political, highly related to a political history, ideologically oriented. And for me, this is what makes interesting to use this category of villages, because you open a discussion that is exactly at the kind of limit of the politically correct. And this is useful, because otherwise we would just say the same old things about Paris. In this way, new aspects can be revealed. And also this contrast is very interesting, because it's something that reopen certain old taboo, also in a way. And of course, those villages are not intended as segregated communities or communitarism. They are metropolitan villages. They are villages, as you remember probably the Tönnies Society and Community, the sociologist, you understand exactly what Tönnies was saying about the fluidity of passing from one dimension to the other. At the same time, the same day, during the day, you can pass from the metropolitan condition to the village conditions. And they are not in opposition, they work together. And this is what I think a space should give you, no? Different dimensions. And here, for example, you see the very interesting way in which, you see more or less in the red, in which Osman did not destroy them, the villages, but just make a kind of crust around them. And then the villages continue to live behind the Osmanian crust. And when you go on site, you can really see the way in which the attachment, the two typologies, buildings, were really connected one to each other, maintaining kind of recognizability. It's really incredible. And also this gives a different way of reading the Osmanian transformation. Extremely, extremely interesting. So this atlas is incredible. It's incredible because it's the first time that an atlas of landscapes is made for a city. So we are saying that a city is a landscape, like a territory with mountains, valleys, etc. And all the atlas of landscape that have been realized through the European Convention do not really address the cities as landscapes in a very, very schematic way. And here these are some of the elements we decided to highlight. For example, the passage. The unities are coming from this reading of the topography and the morphology. We made so many things that it's difficult to name all of them, but conversation of the atlas with among the most important landscape designers in Paris. And they were really stressing the fact that, yes, but Paris is flat. No, it's not flat. Look at it is made. Yes, there is an inclined plane. That's the flood plane. But there is a lot of many other things. So even landscape architects, I mean, they consider that the problem in Paris is the micro topography. No, there is also the big, important topography. Here you see how it is really entering, and then how, with the citizens, we could establish there were fractures. Some of the boulevards that are really dividing some parts, or some of the monuments, or some of the topographic elements, and then arriving also to this first understanding. So you see every single part has a start from the topography and then contain also the cultural, let's say, dimension. For example, clarifying that there are, sorry, I had to col. I mean, in the English is col, it's like the French. The col is the lowest point of a high edge between two mountains. So it's this point, no? In Paris, there are several col, and we found this in all geographic treatise, but not today. Today, nobody speak of col. But the cols are very interesting because the railways entering Paris, as you know, from all the directions, they use exactly that low point in between two higher points. So that you understand also a certain logic and rationality of the way in which the metropolis has been constructed, and you find all the names, and in fact you can name. Once you have found a name, you can name them. And that was very, very interesting. I go quick. So here is the superposition of those unity together with the villages, together with the sections where you see the fact that Paris is not flat, of course, at all. This is, for example, the floodplain. You see in the sections, you see where is the Seine River, and it's full of small movement and bigger movement. So I think that this atlas is not a plan. It's bringing a point of view, a very clear point of view about the territory, in this case an urban territory, and the landscapes, that can orient projects, concrete projects. So I conclude with this image about the way in which we are working on this idea of atlas of Parisian landscapes. Of course, there is this cultural, we are working with movie directors, we are working with urban sketchers, we are working with kids, we are working with a lot of kind of people. But let's say, to synthesize, cultural landscapes, of course, this is what the EU Convention is asking for. We have to remember simply that the definition used by the Convention is coming from the geographers. So about the question of the relation among disciplines, I don't think that you have, I mean, beyond transdisciplinary or interdisciplinarity may mean that you need to understand the perspective of the different disciplines. Again, it's not because now we work together that then we forget that behind us there are traditions of thinking. For example, the cultural landscape is clearly coming from the geographer. The geographer wrote the European Convention. But, for example, there is not valorization of emotion, the philosophy of landscape, which means also the attention to the creation of a contemporary environmental aesthetic. I put a next point. Because, of course, there is also the landscape in the sense of the ecosystemic reading, the functional relations, territorial logics and rationalities in the age of climate change. The adaptation of Paris is a fundamental problem for the Parisian landscapes. And you know that there is now literature about the new environmental aesthetic. Imagine to demineralize all the squares in Paris. There are big projects ongoing of radical demineralization. And then ask yourself, but if I have to do a manifestation, where I'm going to? There was a project, now it has been very much criticized, so it has been abandoned, but there was a project of transforming the Parvis, so the space in front of the municipality, the Hôtel de Ville of Paris, a space where citizens go to protest, in a forest. Or the Place de la République, just remade, where all the protestations were in the last few years, is now criticized because it's too mineral. So take out the mineral part and find green space for the water and for... I'm sorry, but I start to become a little bit suspicious, no? So this environmental aesthetic, first of all, is a different aesthetic. So forget about certain opening as well in Paris, symmetry, dissymmetry, opening, the view, perspective, forget. Okay, but this can be just aesthetic, let's say. Although I think that for the protection of heritage, this can become already a problem. But secondly, think to the what kind of spaces are we designing? Of course, I'm in favor of demineralization and greening and whatever, and water, space for water. But I think at a certain moment, there is also a kind of a democratic issue. We need also space, multifunctional space, where we can gather, where we can express. There is a political meaning of space and landscapes. So this is a very crucial point inside the Atlas of Landscapes that has also to give recommendations on this kind of... We speak, let me use these words, of neo-hygienism. You know hygienism? Haussmann worked inside hygienism, no? The idea of the modern architecture, modern urbanism, they worked inside the hygienist perspective. Then this was criticized in the postmodern era, this was criticized and say, no, the history has the rights, the protection of environment. Okay, and now, with the argument of climate change, which is again a kind of hygienist argument, we are imagining to use the same strategies for every territory. So I think that to put the attention on the fact that there are some risks there. I'm not saying that it's not correct. Of course it is necessarily correct. But let's remember that maybe there are some risks inside this. And this neo-hygienism has to be investigated because it can hide other choices. No? And finally, the urban landscape. The question of the urban landscape. The urban landscape, you know, there is a long tradition of thought related to that, from the geographical one, with the Stadtlandschaft, for example, from the German geographer Passarge, for example. The translation of Stadtlandschaft has been always very difficult, because at the same time it can be the urban landscape, or the landscape city, or in the French, they say, translation, ville paysage, which is something different. But there is also the British tradition of the townscape that was very much related to the aesthetic of the picturesque. And where the idea was that design can reinforce the experience of place. So that's interesting, no? The variety, the differences, that's also where design can play a role to maintain, to reinforce a space of differences and not homogeneity. And I think that our cities are looking for this kind of reading. And normally, if you just have the architectural and the urban reading, or the social reading, the landscape reading imagines as something different. No, it's really the urban material, no, that needs to be read in terms of landscape with this at least four, could be even more, let's say, points of view. Because when you speak with the people, and I have really measured this in the many public moments we have had, you understand that there is a need to speak of landscapes. So you were using the terms of medium, no? Landscape as a medium. But as a medium for what? As a medium for reopen also public debate about space. Space, all the social, political dimensions of space. For example, our villages, I didn't show you, but we have a certain data showing that we have really cold villages in which there is no inhabitants anymore, just bed and breakfast, hotels, and tourists, let's say. Of course, those are not villages anymore. They are just the simulacrum of the village that is still there. No? There is a question of gentrification. A gentrified space is a different landscape. So we are looking to gentrification as producing a specific type of landscape, of urban landscape. And we investigated a study realized about is Paris today more gentrified than some years ago? Of course, for the Socialist Party that is running the city, this is an important point. Because the city has fantastic spaces, public spaces, much better than in the past, much less cars. But is it more just? And they say yes, because we have doubled the amount of social housing, which is immense. They've been very good. So it's more mixed than before. But this is not true. The city is more poor, so more social housing, and more rich. And the low middle class is disappearing. And we have understood this walking with the people. They were telling us, my son, my daughter cannot afford to live inside Paris. She's now going somewhere outside because it's too expensive. So you understand, and I want to really put the landscape at the beginning of the story, in the sense that this is producing different landscapes. The landscape of a city inhabited by a plurality of populations a plurality of activities with the ground floor that is not completely homogenized with the typical set of bobo type of shops, is much more interesting than this kind of flattened space. But to do this, you need what? Policy and a political courage. So you start with the landscape, and you get to the main values, priorities, etc. So to conclude, I want to come back to a fundamental small book, Walking by Thoreau. You know, there is this word that Thoreau is using really at the beginning, that is sauntering. Sauntering is an English word, but it is coming from French. And sauntering can be the sainte terre, so is the pilgrims that were going to the Holy Land at the time of the Crusades. So we are like, well, that's what Thoreau is saying, we are like sauntering people. So it's the same attitude we have. Now we are going towards this future, and we try to understand what and in which way the landscape can be this medium to understand the transformation, the change. Or can be also landless, because it can be also sans terre, so without land. And we are never at home, and at home all time, no? Because in fact we are at the same time much more nomadic, but at the same time looking for, searching for this moment in which you put your feet somewhere and you understand where you are. And where we are is in fact this new condition where we are I think in the moment in which we need to rethink the biopolitical project that the modern era has brought to us, all the transformation that have been already happening to that project, and to reformulate today in this moment of very deep transformation. And this is the topic of the last book that has just been translated, is in Italian and in French, and in a few months will be also is already translated, but will be published also in English. That is the biopolitical garden. And I use the term garden instead of city, instead of space, I use garden because the idea of the garden always contain, is a metaphor that has been very much used to speak of the way in which you are educating, elevating kids, people, populations, etc. So it's a very biopolitical term, in my opinion. So I wanted to highlight through the metaphor of the garden the biopolitical nature of the transition. Thank you very much.
I would like to do that conference. I want to do that conference because it's very important for me, and I learn a lot of things. And I not only learn, but I remember a lot of things. Because if, I don't know, I think you know that, in Portugal, the School of Landscape Architects defends your ideas since 19, because we think landscape has a device for the quality of life. Mm-hmm. So you are speaking with us about quality of life, about development, about social justice. And it's very good to read, to understand, and to think about landscape, not a scenery, but a space to live, a metaphor like a garden, because garden is always a representation of an ideal landscape. So your book is very good indeed, because it takes us to the idea of utopia. And the other idea that it's very good for me, it's thanks for being the social ecological transition, because now we have only ecological transition. Exactly. And for me, it's very important to bring to us the ecological transition. Ecological, but first of all, social also. Yeah. Because ecology without sociology, it's not real ecology. Exactly. I know the last, it's not an encyclica, but it's a proclamation of Papa Francisco. It speaks about social ecology. It's a very good writing, and I remember a lot of things about you. So I have no words. I have no questions.
You had the words.
Thank you very much. I have no words. I think the idea of solidarity, the landscape as a political device, for me it's very important also. In Portugal we have not yet, I don't know if a national policy of landscape. Mm-hmm. We are with a bad planification. And we don't see the soil, neither labor or water and so on, like important things. Mm-hmm. We are in a dichotomic way of thinking.
I have understood this.
And you bring to us the idea of together, not only in transdisciplinarity, but discuss what is landscape. Mm-hmm. It's not only a scenery, it's a space, but it's polysemic and polyedric too. And so I have no words. I'm very happy to be here with you. I learn, and I remember a lot of Ribeirão, one of our great landscape architects, that created a minister of quality of life, where he developed all the law of landscape in Portugal. It's very good, indeed, to think about that in the 80s.
Yeah, if I can just react to this, I remember I was saying before that everything was already said 50 years ago.
Yes, we have forget.
We decided to forget.
Yes, we decided to forget.
Or someone helped us to forget.
Yes, it's impossible because...
No, this is really a problem. For a historian, if I was an historian, yes. I would really study this kind of moment of loss of
these
memory.
Cycles of...
but also the loss of...
But we lost time, and we lost soil, and we lost water, and we lost... And now we are completely, deeply in ecological... I'm a landscape architect, it's important to say. But I don't believe in ecological measures to resolve to our climate change. No, it's impossible.
Without the political and the social, they are not solving anything.
So I think very interesting your conference. And now I think there are a lot of people to want to speak about.
Yes, I think it's better. I would also have many questions, but I think that for now we could open some questions from the public, some reactions. I think there was a microphone in the room, so...
Yes.
Okay. There's one there. Two there. Okay, let's organize.
Thank you very much. My name is Cristina Jonas. I'm an historian. I thought your presentation was amazing. And what struck me most was how you're challenging us to think about possibilities. We know all about what was wrong done and how can we plan good things. I'd like to ask you something further about how can you project this, how to live accordingly to warming, global warming, not thinking how wrongdoing we did, but how can we plan better and further to face this new reality that is coming on. Thank you.
As you want. It's a big question, so maybe it's just a few elements. But in the case of the Vesdre Valley that I did not present, the occasion was really starting from the catastrophe, and to say that even a moment of crisis, a moment of catastrophe, can be the occasion to think a vision. So we decided immediately to start not from the problem created by the flood only, but to start from what it can be a vision for this valley, knowing that the valley had problems that were much older than just the flood. But it was a poor valley. And the poor people, where were they? They were in the lowest part of the valley. So they were those that more affected by the floods. And together with the vision, there was a question of the solidarity. And I think that the water solidarity is so clear that all the other policies should be inspired by the fact that when you speak of water, it's very clear what you mean by saying solidarity. All the villages that are on the top, on the plateau, they understood that it was because also of them that the lower part of the valley was flooded, because they have realized so many industrial areas, impermeabilized land without any attention to the flow of the water. And then very rapidly the water arriving from the sky goes to the lower part. So there you understand that everybody has to do a part of the job. The agriculture has to change because the agriculture of today is not able anymore to contain water. The soils have been so compacted that you don't find any capacity of infiltration, for example. In the past, you had much more vegetation, and the roots were stabilizing the soil, were helping the soil to maintain the water. And today is not like that. So you have to start to open a discussion with the farmers about a different type of agriculture. On the other side of the valley, there has been a very important landscape transformation. In the past, it was a peat area, transformed in conifers, drained land. So you drain the land because you want to plant conifers. So at the end, the land is something that is like a rock. And again, the water is just going down to the lower part. And then you have to restart, to rethink maybe the possibility to close the drainage, to restore the pits. And the pits are not restored as they were exactly in the past, but maybe they contribute also to maintain a little bit of the water in the upper part. So say you can rediscover the sponge that you had and that you have sacrificed to the conifers. And again, this is dealing with thousands of hectares that you have to reimagine. So each step is an immense transformation of landscapes, exactly of landscapes. And, we are not really ready for these radical transformations. And then, of course, there is the lower part of the valley. And there you have also a fantastic heritage in terms of industrial buildings, in bricks, very beautiful. Maybe you have to adapt some of them. You can reuse them, but you have also maybe to take something out because this river needs a little bit more space. We have put the cities there in the most risky space. And you have the problem of this remains of the industrial era, population coming from immigration, more and more poorer, that are all concentrated in the lower part. And then you understand that there is also the problem of proposing new economies, of bringing new equipments. So, in fact, there is everything to be reconstructed around that. I have not the solution, of course, on this, but the idea that you can start from some clear points, and one of them is really that every single part of the territory has to play a role, I think is important. You should not concentrate the efforts in one thing, in one policy, in one part. You should really understand more in a systemic way how the territory can work in a more adaptative way to the climate change.
Yeah, just before go ahead with the next question. In fact, that was one of my reactions to your presentation because it's much more. Rather than a solution, it's much more about the methodological approach towards the problem in all its layers, and especially of considering all these scales of reading, not just the scale of something that is close while we are talking about the villages, but also the big scale of the valley, for Eastern Geneva, and the pine woods, or in wider scale. So the thing that surpasses from your presentation, it's really that, is that we are not just addressing a problem and a specific solution to that problem, we are addressing a systemic reading of this problem in the overall of problems that we can find in that question.
We are also, because I think was one of the points that was already addressed, we are also reconstructing narratives.
Yeah.
Yeah, you are reconstructing also a story in a way, you know, and that's important because I think we are in this moment in the need to reconstruct also stories.
I think there were two arms in the middle of the room.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Paola. It was very nice to hear your talk. My name is Rui Sá. I'm an anthropologist, and I was wondering, after listening you, if there are space for non-material beings, and my question is more ontological, like myths, legends, spirits, fates, transcendent and immanent beings that can be also considered in this notion of landscape, and particularly on your Atlas of Paris, where you are working, are there space for these beings?
Thank you for the very interesting point. For sure, there is a space to enrich the type of gaze we have constructed. We are never... in a way, we try to touch that level of immaterial beings through the imaginaries.
Okay.
But of course, we are not working with an anthropologist, that's true. I have seen the work of an anthropologist on another atlas that is on a piece of Greater Paris. I have to say that I found it not so convincing because nevertheless it was based mainly on discussions with a group of inhabitants during the time of the construction of the atlas, and I thought that it was a little bit limited in the sense that there is much more than that. We tried to touch this through mainly literature, as I said, that integrate very much also these aspects. But also we work with Dominique Marchais, that is a very good and important movie director, and he's now he's just out with his new film that is about a river. I think it's a story of a river, l'histoire d'une rivière, or La Rivière, something like that. And who is also very, very attentive to this. But we are not really working with an anthropologist like this. I think that you are probably remember here De Martino and the south of Italy, this kind of aspects. Yeah, I think that would be very interesting. Maybe a next occasion to work together.
My name is Luciana Saboy. I'm from the University of Brasilia. I've been quite interested in what in one work, and one thing that really strikes me is particularly today is one thing that you already said in on one of the comments. It's this transversality between a huge scale of the territory and at the same time this configuration of territorialities from the soil, how you walk in it, that, and how infrastructures that sometimes are not really visible, but the way that infrastructure can really deal with public space and democratic space. And I'm not just thinking about the example that you gave of Paris, but I'm thinking of Latin American landscapes, that we have such a huge social inequality, and sometimes we deal to have this compact center in historical centers, but it's the infrastructure and mobility that allows to get the periphery and for people to work and everything. So I really want you to go further as this kind of design that sometimes neglects the border of the city, saying that there is no identity, no landscape or no architecture. Sometimes when we are dealing with in our design studios, we just look at the landscape that we can configure by morphology from historical cities, and maybe the whole of design is really into this infrastructure or this landscape that we don't really have a vocabulary for that. That's really between things that I think it's really interesting the way that you deal with the between. That's my it's more a comment, and if you can go through that.
Thank you. Of course, we might expand, but I don't know if maybe there are other questions we can. And then
you answer. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Inês. I'm an architect, and I also studied environment, sustainability, and education. And we talked about the political and social spheres. And I wanted to ask, what do you think that is the role of education? And I talk about education beyond academic field regarding your research. Also, I'm particularly interested in studying the relations between womanhood and landscape. So I would like to ask, how do you relate the question of the...
Sorry, you said woman and landscape, or woman?
Yes, womanhood, like to be
woman.
a woman, yep.
Okay.
And landscape. And I wanted to ask, how can we relate like the ecological perspective with the cycles, like the menstrual cycle, that it's also related with all the cycles that we can perceive with our bodies in landscape? It's systemic.
I think I'm not the best one to react on this type of topics. Maybe we can speak this individually, I think. I don't feel it easy making. No, I'm joking. So you're saying the gender question, or is something different?
It's more about like ecofeminism.
Okay.
And the way that this shift can be related with a gender perspective. Like one of, I don't know if you know the Fritjof Capra's work, and that he associates the patriarchal structure that we are living in with the abuse of land and the way that you describe territory. And he believes, and I also do, that to shift this view from the female perspective can bring positive changes.
We have recently had Silvia Federici in one of the conference we have organized in at DPFL for the student of this new program, Master of Postgraduate Master in Urban and Territorial Design. I see here that there is Nancy Cooling, and we are running this program together with the ETH in Zurich. So it's the only program between the two polytechnical schools in Switzerland, of which we are very proud, of course. And so we have a session dedicated to counter projects, and she was one of the speakers. So for me, this is a little bit a controversial point, because I'm older than you, and the feminist age for me was many decades ago, and in a way, personally, I consider that I had solved with this problem, in the sense that I prefer to maintain a kind of neutral field where we can go beyond that. I don't know if this is understandable, but I don't want to justify myself. I don't want someone to justify on the basis of a gender and on the basis on a specific orientation. I'm really for a kind of neutral field where we can work together, and that's all. And I don't accept any type of power, division, but also power effect or impact on me from other type, related to this kind of gender question. Maybe it's not an answer to your point, but it's the way in which I treat this question in the work I do.
Hello, thank you very much. I have just one question that I would like, when you are present the terms of pedagogy that you use as a student or in the university, it's very important that normally the research is used also with the students. It's one question. You use the research.
Yes. In fact, I said that some of the materials were produced together with students or are they related to PhD thesis. I think that is very important to introduce research, because I am also convinced that through mapping, through design, you produce a very interesting type of research. So you need to involve them. Yes.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the presentation. Just two questions. You talked about the need to work in non-attractive landscapes, such as in Wallonia, and the need to develop new imaginaries, new narratives about these territories. So the question was a little bit, how can we promote the development of these collective imaginaries in a way that they are transformative of these areas, especially when we are talking about areas that many times, because of its character, because of its scale, do not correspond directly to a political identity. Not in the administrative terms, but many times we are talking about territories where the people living there see themselves as located in a small village, but we need them to understand they are part of a bigger system. So how to promote this? And also if you could speak something about the typologies of collective spaces that we can design in these areas of diffuse urbanizations of the horizontal metropolis that necessarily are not the same of the central areas.
Okay, again, a very big question. I go back to the best case because, but I could also use other cases where at the end of the work we can do, we are there for a while, for maybe 2 years. Very often we make a lot of work on site. Also in the case of the West, really days and days going through all the villages, spending days with them, both with open doors, let's say with people, citizens, and of course with the politicians, with the people also working inside the different municipalities. They have a very important role, I think, in bringing this to become a project, to be realized. So you are also dealing with the sectoriality. You need to bring them together and try to work in a different way also, just simply when you design a street, how many different services you need to put together to make today a street. And at the end of this reflection, we always arrive to the point that our instruments are not, of course, enough to transform this reality. They are just a first hint, or they are part of a series of hints. And then you need to maybe to invent new ways to bring some ideas to their realization. We are proposing in many contexts to have laboratories. Laboratories that are not the idea of inventing a new bureaucratic space, but just to have the occasion to bring together in a different way, in a different order, with different priorities, for example, citizens, or associations, and the services of the city, or some of the politicians, and to rediscuss in a different way, let's say with a different architecture of space, which is not so expensive, because when you tell the region of Wallonia. No, you really need to make a laboratory of the best. Even, I think today that there is a seminar in the University of Liège in which, together with the colleagues of the Liège University, we are trying to bring this political point. We cannot just abandon the scheme to the normal bureaucratic type of management. You need to bring something different because you need to listen to the people, to continue to listen. The problem is that in many cases we work in this way and we ask to have this kind of conversations, but then once the work is finished, stop. There is no need to continue this conversation. One, on the contrary, is exactly the moment where you can really rely on this conversation. And inside this laboratory, we were proposing 3 pillars. The one, let me use this word that is a little bit fashionable today, but is important, the Baukultur, so the question of the building culture that is evolving, that has to evolve with the ecological transition. The second is, of course, also the land use observatory, because there are also problems of this type. There are a lot of areas that are still buildable and are under big risks. So you have to avoid at least to build certain areas. So you have to understand how you manage. This is a very old traditional problem for urbanism, but still very, very relevant today. And the third pillar is about, and that's also answering maybe partially to the question of education, is about the culture of risk, to construct a culture of risk. Because what happened in this valley was that nobody was expecting what happened. So there is no memory, no understanding, and the risk is more and more present in our territories, and we have no culture to go through this risk. And this has a consequence, because if you imagine that we will be able to reconstruct the conditions of perfect safety as the modern project promised to us to be safe, but we understand that we are not safe, then we have to learn to live with this risk, and maybe also to be a little bit resilient to that risk, because we will not be able, and this also at the end of our study of the West, together with the hydraulic engineers, etc., we had to say that in any case the risk will not be solved, so the flooding will be there. From now to 2050, there will be at least 2 or 3 episodes like those. And of course, we have not transformed all the agriculture. We have not replanted all the peat vegetation. So we will not be ready immediately. So we have to live with the phenomenon. And this is something we have to learn. How can we live with such a phenomenon? So I think that there are several big themes to be addressed, which are not part of the traditional management, and that needs the help also really of the civic society. Civic society is fundamental in this transition. If you don't work with the civic society, better to go on holiday and to wait for the catastrophe to come, and that's so about the typology of spaces. I think that first of all there is the use of the territory that is changing. And that, especially after the pandemic, I think that certain points are now more clear for everyone, that you need landscapes, that you need a direct relation with the different geographies that are inside your city, your territory, that you need to walk, to have this capacity to stay outside, so the living outside and not just inside climatized areas is really becoming more clear to everyone. So there are several transformations of society that are already going in the direction of putting the territorial public space at the center of our reflection. A territorial public space can be many different things at the same time. You have to look to the problem of flooding and you realize public spaces. You have to work on this kind of dormitories that are villages without any social purpose anymore, and you work on public spaces. So, I mean, the point is not to invent a new type. The problem is to construct this network that for me is the weak structure I was speaking about. And I think that the question of continuity has to be reframed. Continuity is important. It's not only the point of comfort, but it's really something that is giving you, you are more confident when you can understand how continuous is your space. Is a question also of barriers, of inaccessibility, of enclaves. So it has multiple justifications or multiple arguments. And I think that the question of continuity, a different type of continuity, not the one of the modern city, has to be reframed, and maybe the existing typologies can contribute to that, but what is new for me is the emphasis on this continuity that is fundamental.
Well, I was being told by the organization, so we should close the session, otherwise we will jeopardize the overall schedule. We can still discuss and talk with Paola during our lunchtime, our breaks. Thank you, Paola, for your amazing presentation. It was really food for thought.
Attention.